Welcome to this webinar on innovation. I'm really excited. Just before we actually started to go on air, talking to some friends who I haven't talked to and seen for over a year. I'm actually, if you notice my background, I'm in a conference room in Las Vegas, first conference I've ever been to. Love to have you open up your chat box there and just tell us where you are, both what town you're in and what company you're with. And the other thing I'd love to have you drop into chat there is, when you think about innovation, what does that really mean to you? I am actually going to get this started. I want to do just a little bit of housekeeping. Feel free to ask questions, make comments in chat. Prefer to keep most of it there rather than in the Q&A, but we'll be watching both. We've got Carmichael, California, National Healthcare Associates in Valley Stream, New York. That's about as far away as we get. Carmichael's almost home for me, so that's really terrific, and so I'm glad you're here. And with that, I'm actually going to turn the Shelley Whites is going to moderate the panel, and I'm going to turn my camera off and my microphone off, and I will get on with the conversation. So I'm really excited about having you here. I'm excited to learn from you guys today. So Shelley, it's all yours.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Steve, I don't recall already if you said this, but we are recording the webinar and you'll be able to access it later on. And so we're going to jump right in just a second. But I wanted to thank especially Dan and Jason for joining us here today, and take a moment and let everybody introduce themselves, tell a little bit about your story and why you said yes to do this panel. And Jason, let's start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Shelley. It's great to be on this. I'm Jason Childers. I'm the Senior Vice President for Merrill Gardens. I've been in the industry for about 20 years now, mostly sales and marketing and operations during that time. My reason for being a part of this panel is pretty simple. Nate asked me to do it, and I think Nate's a good guy, so I said I would do it. But also, I think it's important to get your head out of the day-to-day and join in on discussions like this, and simply having conversations and being open to other ideas and perspectives is to me, that's kind of a key part of the innovation process. So it's nice to kind of have these discussions and be a part of them. So thanks for inviting me.
Sure, thank you. And Dan, I'm looking at you over here, but I don't know where you are on everybody else's screen.
I'm looking at you over there on Hollywood Squares. So hi, yeah, Dan Hudson. I'm the Vice President of Marketing for Claiborne Senior Living. Been in the industry about, I think this is my lucky 13th year. Have been working primarily in marketing, sales, also in a past life, strategic planning, innovation and experience design, corporate communications, et cetera. This is a subject that is near and dear to my heart. As anyone who's seen me speak at conferences or just run on and on in the hallway, they know that this is a particular pet peeve of mine, that there's not more innovation. Not a spoiler alert. Yes, I don't think we're very innovative, but we'll get into that.
There goes that question.
Yeah, I'm here because Nate didn't ask me to participate, but fortunately John did. So you're stuck with me.
Great. And that's a good segue over to you, John.
Oh, that's great. This is John Larisha. I'm the founder and CEO of Welcome Home Software. Innovation is core to what we do. It is probably the only competitive differentiator that actually can persist when you run a technology company in sales and marketing. I've been focused exclusively on Welcome Home for the past 3 years since our founding. But before that, spent almost a decade in consulting, working with operators and similar providers, mostly around sales and marketing. So very excited here.
Good. And Nate, on to you.
Yeah, thank you, Shelley, and thank you, Steve, for the introduction, for hosting the conversation today. It's a real pleasure to be part of this group. So my name is Nate O'Keefe. I'm co-founder and CEO of Rubrik. My brief background, Rubric is my second startup. My first was an early mobile medical app company called Modality, and our very exciting claims to fame, where we had 4 of the first 500 apps in the App Store when it launched way back in 2008, fully almost 1% of the catalog at one point. And we were one of 10 companies on stage for Apple's launch event. But I started Rubric after I had some personal experiences that led to a desire to help older adults and families make better decisions faster, to kind of raise all ships by solving for that uncertainty, anxiety, and guilt that keeps the vast majority of us from taking action. And so, I'm excited about this panel because for us, innovation meant building a new mousetrap. Nothing like Rubric existed before, but for John, Dan, and Jason, I know it's meant different things at different times to solve very different problems. And I think we're going to hear some great perspectives. So looking forward to the talk today.
Wow. All right. Well, that is a very good setup. And I'm going to harken back to Steve's question to everybody watching. What does innovation mean to you? Because it's different things to different people. And I'd like to, hear a little bit more about that and what a culture of innovation really is and why it matters. And Jason, if you don't mind kicking us off there, what does innovation mean to you?
I think innovation to me is, kind of that search for always, trying to figure out, is there a better way to do this? Is there a different way to do this? Is there a more efficient way to do this? It's trying to break away from the mentality of that's the way we've always done it. I think that's important, especially in our industry, and I think a culture of innovation is one that encourages change and growth, and not for the sake of change itself, but for the sake of always looking to find a better way or a new way, or a way that simply creates a greater sense of delight for our customers.
Right.
I think it's an environment that accepts and even celebrates failure when you're looking for a new idea or a program or a concept. And sometimes things don't work, and being open and accepting that you can learn from that, you can adjust and try again, and that you'll never achieve perfection, but we should always be trying to strive for it. So, yeah.
All right, appreciate that. Dan, I'll let you chime in on how you define innovation, and looking ahead and looking back to your other answer. Yes, okay, you can also answer whether the industry itself is innovative.
Yeah, I already answered that. No. So we can move on. We can move on to other questions.
Yeah.
We can certainly, we can expound upon that a little after we sort of define what innovation is. For me, innovation is pretty simple. It's about finding new ways to create value for our customers. And it can take a lot of different forms. It's not just about a particular product or service. It's not necessarily about improving process. There are many different types of innovation, but looking at what a culture of innovation looks like, for me, it's one that supports more creative thinking and more creative solutions. As Jason said, it's not simply the status quo. I think it involves a deeper dive into what customers really want and desire. For me, a culture of innovation is very customer centric. It's not organization centric. It's not about, this is how we've done things and this is how we're always going to do things. It's really looking through the eyes of the customer and understanding how things need to be done. And it's a culture where we generate insights from that deeper understanding of our customer, and how we turn those insights into value in the form of newer, improved products, services, processes. And it's also one that holds people accountable to organizational objectives and key focus areas, but gives them a lot of discretion. Within that constraint box, it gives them a lot of discretion in terms of how they want to operate within those parameters. So you want to give people room to think and act creatively, but you do have to set, some guidelines, some guardrails to that.
Right. So given that, why do you feel that senior living has not been able to be innovative, to behave that way?
So I think that if you go back to the definition that, it's about new ways to create value, I'd say I think we've not been innovative because I think we tend to stick to our knitting. We tend to do the same things over and over again. We will make minor variations or incremental improvements. And improvement is great, but it's not necessarily innovation. And I'm sorry, you want to talk a little bit about why we're not innovative?
Yeah.
Partly I think it's people, partly it's culture, and partly it's just a lack of basic understanding of what innovation is. I see a lot of people talk about, innovative things that I look at and I think, well, that's not really an innovation. That might be an incremental improvement, or it's a variation on a very common product. But if you look at the senior living industry and what everyone's doing, the number of organizations that are, I think, really doing anything innovative could be counted on one hand. And please don't ask me to name any.
Well, we've got two here.
Well, I'm talking from the operator's perspective.
Yes.
What I see out there is I see a limited offering in terms of products and services, and we see different sort of incremental variations on that. But I think that, one of the reasons that we have problems is that the people who typically work in senior living, they come from a healthcare background. They have a very, kind of punch list oriented way of operating within a highly regulated environment. When I started, there was a lot of, I was frequently told, that's not the way we do things, which to me, that's the kiss of death.
Right.
And we don't actively encourage people to be creative and think in a more unorthodox fashion.
Well,
So,
maybe after today, they will, Let me switch over to John for a second. John, do you agree with Dan? Is senior living innovative, or as he says, it's not?
No, I don't. Unfortunately, I don't think that senior living is innovative, and we'll probably talk about this a little bit. Everything surrounding senior living, though, is. You look at what's going on in technology, look at what's going on in hospitality, look what's going on in consumer packaged goods. Everyone is looking at this group of seniors and trying to think about how to be innovative. But I don't think that the operators themselves are particularly. And as a result, they dabble. Quite honestly, I think it benefits folks like Welcome Home or Nate and Rubrik's team because they will look outside and bring those things in. But there's not a systemic, repeatable process for how are we going to be innovative. And I don't want to be critical. There's a lot of reasons why. At first, you just think about where's the funding coming from. Funding is typically coming from those that are thinking about this as a real estate investment. And so there's a risk parameter that when you're investing in real estate that's very different than when you're investing in technology. I think the second is core operations, just every single day executing on the basics to motivate employees, delight family members, and help seniors thrive are hard. And the risk of failure is higher. In the event that a survey for some reason has a glitch, that's very different than if someone in a memory care unit isn't properly. But I think the biggest thing comes down to not the people per se, the human beings, but just the organizations. Even the very largest senior living operator has a very small team that has responsibility for a lot of things. So how do you innovate around pricing when there is no one whose full-time job is to think about pricing? How do you innovate around marketing and messaging when you have less than an FTE? And so that's why what I think ultimately you want to do is foster and encourage a culture to make this distributed, so folks have the opportunity to own creativity, to have a degree of autonomy, and to encourage that kind of risk taking and learning that's all rooted in what's best for our clients.
Right, right, absolutely. You were talking a little bit about where innovation is coming from, and a lot of it is coming from outside of industry. And in the chat window, I saw somebody even said, I forget how they put it, part of the problem might be if people in senior living think they're being innovative, that's part of the problem. It's just not happening there. And I know even within Rubric, just this week, we had a real estate developer contact us and say, hey, we've got all these buildings, we want to turn some into a place where seniors can live. And they're definitely coming in. But I wondered if you had other examples outside of the industry where you see the innovation sort of, merging in.
Well, both the Fortune 500 world and the startup world is very active in the senior space. Investors, entrepreneurs, people looking to make a name for themselves inside of General Mills or Disney Cruise Lines are looking at the silver wave. They're looking at the longevity trends. They're looking at the nature of aging and the desire to age in place. And they're building and funding companies or divisions to go after that. And it's a competitive threat if senior living operators similarly aren't being innovative, because people are trying to enable more time at home. In Atlanta alone, where we're based, I'm friendly with 8 different companies that are in either age tech or senior tech, regardless of how you want to phrase it. At 8, and while I wish that I made this up. While this webinar started, I got another one, so I'm about to be in contact with the 9th. Apparently, I'm the folk for senior tech in Atlanta. But it's, how do you think about coordinating finances across the ecosystem that helps mom or dad? How do you do coordination of care, both generally as well as specifically in terms of Alzheimer's? How are you doing story capture, so you're doing it for the next generation? Concierge services, and it just goes on and on and on. There's just
Right.
so much that's either embrace and learn from, or quite honestly, you get swept under the wave.
Sure.
Hey,
Jason,
Shelley, can I piggyback on that real quick? Because
Sure.
I noticed a question in the chat about who the consumer is. And, I think part of our problem is that we treat seniors as this, monolithic entity, when in fact it's more, and it's not even generational, it's more than generational. It's where people are in terms of their life experience, in terms of their health, in terms of where they are financially. It's not just about age, and it doesn't just involve the end user. It also involves the family influencers. Is the customer the family member? Is the customer the professional referrer? Is the customer the actual older adult? And I can tell you that the needs of someone who may be 80 or 90, who is totally healthy and cognitively fit, are going to be very different from someone who's maybe 60 or 70 suffering from chronic health conditions. So we've got to really, I think, do a much better job of identifying what is our particular slice of the market that we want to target, what are their needs or desires that we're trying to meet, and then what are we developing as a solution for those needs and desires. If we started thinking in those terms, suddenly it opens up all kinds of opportunities. And to John's point, I think that there are a lot of companies outside of senior living that are thinking in that way. And for some reason, we are stuck thinking in very outdated ways about our market.
Right. So Jason, thinking about that, being stuck there and in outdated ways, what do you see as the blocker? And I want to ask you specifically, do you think that there's a certain amount of being content within the industry to let entrepreneurs and startups and innovation just be something that happens out there and you take advantage of? Sense of stasis.
Yeah, I think it's come up a couple times. Dan earlier said, sometimes we tend to stick to our own knitting. I think that's definitely true. And I think our past success is sometimes our biggest obstacle to innovation. There's kind of the old adage, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I think sometimes we don't realize that maybe it's broke. But and we also talked a little bit earlier about, change is hard. It's hard to get people to think differently about ways to do things when, we all have models that have worked well for us in the past. And we use those same models to plan our next project, and we may, make some tweaks here and there along the way. But again, like we said earlier, it's typically more iterative than it is true innovation.
Mhm.
And we don't do anything too crazy when we're looking through that. And then we sell investors on, this is what we've done, and here's the success we have, and now they have those expectations of future projects. So, I
Right.
do think a lot of it just kind of comes down to what we've done well in the past becomes our biggest obstacle for doing something different moving forward.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Hey, Nate, since you brought up that you've been part of 2 startups, and thinking about in those cases, somebody had an idea and started the company, but do you see innovation as something that happens internally and it is best brought up within the company, launched within a company, or is it usually outside demands and pressures?
Well, so it's a good question. And first, I have a story, and it's a failure story because I think that's one of the things we promised when at least when we got together as a group and said, if we don't talk about the failure process as part of it, then we're not really, we're not bringing as much as we should. And I won't name names, but I worked for several years for a healthcare technology company that decided they needed to build a new product kind of from the ground up. It was incredibly complex. It was in a crowded market with lots of competition. And it wasn't really a better mousetrap. It was a similar mousetrap that they believed would thrive kind of based on the power of their brand. They said, if we do the same thing others are doing, people like us so much that they're going to like our product better. And so they built an internal skunkworks team, very smart people, spent millions of dollars, finally launched, a year or 2 behind schedule. And then they shuttered it in under a year. The market had lapped them. They made the wrong kind of build, buy, partner decision. And I think that's a risk that innovators bring with them. They often want to be inventors, and they have the confidence that they can, build that better future themselves because they've done it before. But it's not always the best choice. It's like, if you're it's the hammer and the nail analogy. For Rubrik, all of our successful innovation has been born inside the organization. It's got that stamped with made and invented here in Durham, North Carolina. But, and this is a very big but, it has all been informed by that rigorous attention to voice of the customer. And this discussion around, well, who is the customer, I think is really important. But by that, I don't mean that we've always exactly, built exactly what the customer told us they needed. Often it's meant listening to what they say they need and then trying to figure out if that is truly the need or if they're speaking to a larger or different pain that can be addressed with innovation. That old kind of pre-automobile joke of everyone just says they need a faster horse because they can't imagine an innovation that is beyond what's within their current purview. Not and they not necessarily saying they should. It's just let's deal with the context in front of us. So a little bit of a circuitous answer, but that's kind of how I'm feeling about that.
Yeah, I mean,
So-
someone in the chat said, excuse me, one just thing,
Yeah, go
that
ahead.
you can't wait for outside demand, that would be, that you need to be doing things internally. Does anyone else have a perspective about that?
Yeah, again, it goes back to a culture of innovation, right? Nate mentioned creating an internal skunk works, right? Well, you can't confine innovation to a department within a company, because there are people throughout the company who are going to have to embrace it. They're going to have to own it. They're going to have to execute on it. And so if you don't have that buy-in, you're setting yourself up for failure. So you can't confine it to an R&D department, a skunk works. It's got to be systemic. It's got to be hardwired into the DNA of the organization. And I would be willing to wager that for both John and Nate, they understand that. They don't They don't look to outsiders to help them be innovative. They are breeding an innovative culture within their organization. And I would assume that when they bring new people into the organization, they also hire for that. You know, it's not just hiring for particular experience or a particular skill set. It's also hiring for culture fit. You know, is this someone who thinks in a more unorthodox manner? Are they creative? Do they collaborate well? Can they derive great ideas from the insights that research generates? And I know I'm putting a lot of words in your guys' mouth, but that would be my guess.
Yeah, Dan, that's right. I mean, just to to make a comparison for any operator, if they said we have a culture of caring, but then you drill down and said, okay, explain that to me, and they immediately said, well, for the folks that work in the community and touch the residents every day, they care. You would find that remarkable and wrong. It's like, no, it is the culture of caring has to go throughout, right? Even the folks that are in our accounts receivable, when they interact with the family members around bills, at their heart, they have to have a culture of caring. And I think that the industry does an amazing job of of having selection buying. And by and large, it's um, recruiting or just being the lucky recipients of folks coming into the industry that in their heart care.
Mhm.
And it's just having that same orientation and blending those two, because I think it's incredibly powerful when you care about the person and you're listening in a very action oriented way as to how do we make things fundamentally better and different in whatever it is. And it could be in, again, the structure of a program around dining, or when it comes to how do you think about the daily experience that they're going to have.
Mhm. Mhm. All right, I'm gonna throw another question out there, and I think, Nate, you might have brought this up, or someone else did a minute ago, but let's talk about that role of failure and of testing. I worked in a startup once where if we wanted to try something new, we always did a little bit of it first and tested and saw. So the idea might not have been, siloed, but we were careful in how we rolled it out. So talk to me. Anybody got a good example of a massive failure?
I,
Or
I
even a lifetime?
I'm happy to start this. Welcome Home is a story of massive failure. um, I, my partner and I started Welcome Home knowing that we wanted to help senior living operators, and in particular help sales and marketing teams. And we spent a year and a half doing nothing but customer listening. We listened to everything from real estate investment trust and a lot of time in the community. And one of the things that we heard and thought would be beneficial was a product that was going to provide a lot of lead enrichment data at the point of critical discovery. And the challenge when you do listen to your customers, um, especially when you're working in senior living, is everyone is so nice. And so you would describe what might be the product, and they were very supportive. But when you actually started to put it into their hands, it was ultimately something they said, well, this should be a feature of a CRM. It's not a standalone product. And
Mhm.
and and so that in many ways was a failure. It's like, all right, our very first product needed to be a a very small part of a CRM. And so we went back to the drawing board and said, all right, this is going to be much more ambitious, and created a CRM. And the lead enrichment and the data is quite honestly now less than 1%. And I think that that helped shape all of us and how we're moving forward. Um, because I now joke that Welcome Home's best weeks are our very worst weeks. Right? It's when we have a failure for whatever reason, whether it's an interaction around a report that we're having, or an interaction with a discussion, or heaven forfend that you actually have a bug in a feature that you do. But that's what happens. And by saying that's a great week, it signals to your team that it's okay if something's not perfect. Right? It
Right.
isn't a punishment for trying with the best intentions and all the planning in the world, as long as you started there with what's going to make it better for in our case, the community operators. And when it doesn't work out, you learn from the failure and you get better the next time.
Yeah, yeah.
I'll-
Jason, anything on your mind? Oh, Nate, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'll be honest. And John and I didn't talk about this ahead of time, but I got to know him right when he was left his very secure and cushy and stable job to start a new company. And when he talked about the idea, I honestly wasn't sure I saw the market opportunity, but I trusted, that John was a smart guy and figured it out. But he, put a year and a half into going down paths that ultimately were not the path that made the most sense. And of course, they ended up informing what's become a very successful company. But that year and a half is not, in retrospect, it doesn't sound like that much. But when you're in it every day and feeling like this isn't working or this isn't clicking, or those kind of wins and those victories and failures it feels like a really big sine curve where you're on top of the world or you're at the bottom. And I think innovation requires being able to kind of power through that and getting to kind of level that out. So the wins you're just sort of normalizing your expectations for what you're trying to accomplish. So for us, that kind of need to test and fail is constant. If you don't test, you're not generating data. If you don't have data, you're not making an informed decision. You're going to go with your gut, or you're relying on anecdotes at that point. One of my favorite quotes is, the plural of anecdote is not data. So if two people tell you the same story, it reinforces the belief. It may make you feel good, but it's not nearly enough data to make a critical business decision. And I think the impact that all of us have on our stakeholders, that going with your gut, that listening to two anecdotes rather than really going after that data and seeking out that data and having processes to seek out that data, does a disservice and can make those failures not more than learning experience, actually make them pain points. And I think you want to make them learning experiences, not not disastrous.
Right. Anyone want to add anything to our failure conversation? Otherwise, I've got a question for Jason and Dan.
Real quick, just one observation about failure is that I think that, and this isn't unique to senior living, I think it's a much broader problem. We don't train people who manage other people in how to handle failure, on the part of their people. In concept, we talk about the great value of failure, what we can learn from failure, and how it's a better teacher than success in some ways. But we don't really train people who supervise others in how to manage failure and how to then channel that into future success. And I think that's a real problem, because most companies are not like, say, Nate or John's company, where they have a healthy understanding of the value of failure. And so that's something I would want people to really think about. How do you respond to failure? Do you understand the difference between what I'll call good failure and bad failure, right? There's good failure where you learn from that failure, and people fail because they're trying to do the right things, versus failure that comes from someone's either lack of knowledge, lack of experience, lack of confidence. It's one thing to fail because you're just lousy at your job. It's another thing to fail because you're trying something new and you fail, but you learn, you gather some really valuable data from that experience.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I was talking to someone who said they do a failure Friday. Was that you, John? Or was there someone that was like, was it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. I mean, you recap the week and it, again, I had the following 14 things and all of them went great. That's not very interesting. No one learns from that.
Right.
But when you kind of share war stories as to, okay, where'd you make a mistake? Where'd you fail? It especially as the team grows, it ensures that you're not the only one that learns from falling down and pick yourself back up.
Right. Jason, within your organization, if someone fails, how do you manage that?
Yeah, it's it's been said a number of times now, but it is important to, if you're trying to build that culture of innovation, that you do find ways to make failure okay. And we have kind of an internal mantra here of try it, fix it, do it. To really kind of get the idea across that, to try to make something better, try to move something forward. Sometimes it really is just, having a theory, thinking through it, but then trying it and see what you learn from it. And we try to avoid overthinking and getting so stuck in analysis and trying to make things perfect that we don't move quick enough or we don't try something different. So it's something that's been a key part of what we do in our company. The expectation is we're going to fail, and the way that you handle that is by what did you learn from it, what would you do different next time, and let's tweak it and try it again. So it's an ongoing process.
For those people who are listening right now and thinking, okay, I do want to have more of a culture of innovation. What do I do next? Jason, just a follow-up. And Dan, I want to hear from you on this too, because I think we had some disagreement around this before, slightly different takes on this. Is that something most organizations can start themselves, or should you bring somebody in from the outside into the organization? Can it work to hire, I don't know, a coach, a training program, a consultant, or, how would you kick that off?
I think it depends on each individual organization and how the leaders of that organization approach it. If you have leadership that's very open and vulnerable and wants to hear new ideas and encourages everyone to play a part in that, I don't think it's necessary at all to need to bring folks in from the outside. I do think there's benefits to that, but I think you can really kind of build that culture internally if you genuinely are open to this idea of we're going to fail sometimes. We're going to try some things. We want to keep moving this forward. We have models that worked in the past, but we think they can be better. There's new concepts out there we should be exploring. You have to intentionally at the top of the company really believe that that's important and encourage it. If you aren't that by nature, I think sometimes it can be helpful to bring somebody in from the outside to kind of spur that conversation. I think there's pros and cons though from bringing people in from the outside. On the positive side, you get fresh minds, you get people who are looking at this with a new lens. They don't have the old norms of senior housing that can sometimes get in the way of new ideas or thinking differently about things. But on the negative side, sometimes it's hard to find folks from the outside that don't come into this with some pretty strong stereotypes of what senior housing is.
Right.
And, there's unfortunately in our industry we still battle the what's in people's minds about what senior housing is, and most of the press and the publicity we get is generally not positive. And this isn't an industry like in automobiles where people are going to go test drive cars because they're car people. There's not senior housing people that want to go test drive senior housing or look for kind of the next big thing. It's something you don't think about until you need it, and that's been a challenge too. So I think both are possible. It just really depends on what the culture of your company is, and especially at that leadership level.
Right. What about you, Dan? I mean, have you had success before bringing people in from the outside or homegrown?
I guess it, to some extent, depends on how you're defining bringing people in. I would agree with Jason that, to a large extent, it's about the organization and its culture. Is it an organization that embraces, an openness of thinking, a desire or aspiration for greater innovation and creativity? Or are they kind of set in their ways? Do they suffer from the curse of institutional knowledge? They know so well how things are done that they can't imagine other ways of doing things. And I think you do run into people who have a lack of understanding of our market, of our customer. But where I find value is when you bring people in as facilitators and instigators, people who can help guide you in the right process, as opposed to getting into the content. You know, they don't have to be subject matter experts in our business. They need to be subject matter experts in theirs. And if their business is helping us build a culture of innovation, helping us to think more creatively and sort of outside, the constraints of our normal thinking, I'm less concerned about them, whatever their preconceived notions of senior living are, because that's really not why they're at the table. They're at the table to help give us the tools to think more innovatively, more creatively. And yes, I've had success in the past with bringing in that kind of talent. And then also, bringing employees into your company who do have that skill set and that expertise, but who are not willing to settle for the status quo. You want that mix of outside help and inside champions, who can really help drive this move toward greater innovation from both within, with the support of people outside. I think that's been successful in my past experience. But what it really comes down to is follow through. If it's not sustainable, if after, the people who are helping you facilitate go away, if you just slide back into your previous way of doing things, then it's a failed experiment. Shelley, you're muted.
You know what? There's a big truck going by, so I was trying to save you all that, but this is what happens in real time. Dan, if you're thinking about innovation, and I think everybody probably has something to say about this, but with the four of you are all involved mostly in sales, marketing, and in that realm, where do you see the opportunity in senior living for the most innovation? I mean, or is it limited to living options or operations or sales? Is there particular areas, or is it everywhere?
It really is everywhere. If for those of you who are not familiar with or not as well grounded in innovation, I would encourage you to Google the 10 types of innovation and just spend a little time understanding. There was a consulting firm back in the 70s that developed sort of the framework for what innovation looks like. And I think you'll be surprised at how broadly and how deeply innovation can be practiced throughout your organization. I mean, everything from your profit model, how you make money, to innovation in processes, innovation in strategic partnerships, who you work collaboratively with. I mean, there's a lot of opportunity for innovation at all levels in all departments. But I think you've got to ground it again in that deep understanding of what older adults want, what the families of older adults want. And for me, it always comes back to what are those core desires? And they are things that we all share. We want to be purposeful in our lives. We want to have value in the lives of others. We want to have deep, meaningful relationships with family and friends in the larger community. We want to stay active and engaged. We want to continue to grow creatively, intellectually. If you were to design from scratch a community that was built on those principles, that those are the core needs that we were building to serve, I think you would see communities that look very differently from what the majority of this industry looks like. And I think that's the exciting blue ocean opportunity, is to start building products and services, community or not community, that are focused on those core needs and desires, because suddenly it opens up all kinds of opportunities for thinking differently about our market, and not just focus on sort of the foundational needs of, safety and security.
Right. Absolutely. Anyone else want to comment there? Or if not, I'm going to throw in something from our chat. It's a little bit related. Jennifer asked if each one of you could just answer the question in the last 3 years, knowing that 2020 was a little weird, although I would say COVID probably prompted a lot of innovation. But in the last 3 years, what do each one of you see as a major innovation in senior living? So I know you're not prepared. You can think about it for a minute. Anybody over the last 3?
I think one that, is just now maybe starting to come to fruition, but a lot of people have been focused on it, is trying to figure out what does a mid-market product look like? What is that product that fits somewhere between, kind of market rate senior housing communities and subsidized senior housing communities? How do we reach out to that group that kind of finds themselves in the middle somewhere? So I think that has been a big focus for the industry. We're starting to see more, options coming out, and I think we'll continue to see that as we move forward. But I think that's a big one that's in process.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think it's hard to point to in marketing, which is our lane, a lot of what you would call innovation, because a lot of it is adopting practices and platforms that have been used in other industries for 10, 15, 20 years. And not to say that they translate easily. Some of the reasons they haven't is because selling senior living is so much harder than selling so many other types of products and services that it hasn't been able to be a one-to-one translation that has produced kind of a one-to-one results. But I would struggle to call any of that a real innovation. I do think there have been trends towards that innovation and that were stimulated by COVID. If the industry has relied on talking to someone on the phone and showing somebody a building, the inability to do that has necessitated, obviously, being creative. And some of that's been new technology platforms that have promoted video, have promoted other sorts of remote engagement. Some of it's just better, practices on existing platforms and saying, hey, we're going to get a Facebook group going, and we're going to talk to residents' families at this time every week, and kind of make sure life inside the community is illuminated. But I don't know if I would call that. I would put those in sort of the iteration category over the innovation category. I don't think it makes sense. My piece here to overinvest in talking about how amazing senior living is from a marketing perspective. I would advocate for investing just as much in normalizing aging and normalizing change, including physical, mental, and emotional ability. I see us as a country that's obsessed with milestones. You go to grade school, you get a car, you turn 18, you go to college, you get a job, you buy a house, maybe you have a family. Yet when it comes to the last 20 or 30 years of life, the best narrative we have is, when do we take away your keys and when do we stick you in a home? I think the more we normalize that path from 60 years on, and do so for all walks of life, not just the people that look and talk and act like we do, the bolder people will be about making choices informed by a clear-eyed view of longevity, including looking at senior living communities sooner, talking to home care providers and so on sooner. I think the more we do to just fight that stigma and create not even a counter narrative, just a new, more refined narrative around what's this phase of life look like, the more all ships will rise and rise dramatically. And that for me would rise to the level of innovation in marketing, is kind of normalizing this life phase and making it easier for people to consider these choices before that option of last resort.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Dan or John, any innovations you would point to in the last 3 years that you think have been a little bit groundbreaking?
So I'll go because John's being nagged by someone outside his car. One, I would say in the last 3 years, no. And to Jason's point, yeah, there's a lot of interest in the middle market. My concern is that it becomes simply a price point discussion. It's how do we skinny down services to get to a certain price point, and but it's basically the same, the same model. I like to look at, I like to think in terms of what's going to happen in terms of innovation in the next, say, 3 to 5 years, because there's this dawning understanding that there's this entirely new life stage that has emerged with this generation. I speak of this generation really about the baby boomer and generations to come on the heels of that. You've now got a period of life, if you stay relatively healthy, active, cognitively fit, you've got a stage of life that is every bit as long as your youth and what you consider your sort of your prime years. And because we've never had that with past generations, it's totally uncharted territory. No, we can't look at past generations and say, well, what's my life supposed to be, after traditional retirement? And so I think that is going to drive a lot of innovation around, I'll call it senior living, but really it's beyond senior living. You're going to see a lot of products and services emerge that support people in figuring out, what do I want to be when I grow up, now that I'm in my 60s, my 70s, and my 80s, and I still have a lot of things that I want to do. I still have a lot of life to live. How are you going to support me in doing that in a really rich and purposeful way?
Purposeful.
That was my way of dodging your question.
That's okay. There's a good answer. John, anything to add? Otherwise, I'm gonna segue into.
Yeah, I think it's been well covered. And
Okay.
and
All
I
right,
think that's
good.
why we're all on this call.
All right. So I guess what I'd love to hear from each one of you is, that sort of parting piece of advice that you'd give other executives who think that innovation is important, but they don't know where to start. And, we have people, I think, from all departments here today. So how do they start? They think it's important. I'm just throwing it out there, gentlemen.
Well,
Yeah,
go ahead, John. Go ahead, John.
So, I mean, my advice is, first, make it a priority, right? For you, acknowledge that having a culture of innovation, of trial, error, failure, repeat, getting better, and customer centricity is important to you. And try to have your leadership team also lock arms, because ultimately employees will come and go. They will take ideas that have been germinated in your community or in your operations and bring them to competing areas. Someone will, if you create an interesting building, someone will be able to replicate that. You have to say, this is who we are and this is what makes us different. And it's more than the sum of a bunch of small little parts. And then begin to model that behavior. When you have meetings, ask the one or two questions as to, okay, how is that making us better for who our core customer is? Begin to have the dialogue as to who the core customer is. This isn't about a program. This isn't about an initiative. This isn't about being creative, which is fun. It's almost like marathon running. Like, all right, here's a destination that's always receding into the background of, we're going to get better.
Right.
And so it can be a standing agenda item that starts to reflect it. It could be similar to mine, the Failure Fridays. What did we do differently? Did it work? Was there failure? Let's talk about that. It can be slight tweaks to how you're doing interview questions. But it really is, what are these things that are almost mundane but easily repeatable, and become the nature of how you talk, because then everyone around you is going to have is going to begin to adopt similar language.
Right. Make it a priority. All right. Who's got the next piece of advice?
So innovation with training wheels on it, right? Innovation in a box. Start with your most nagging problems. Take a look at, what's a nagging problem, a chronic issue that no one seems to be able to solve for, right? Because people are more likely to support your efforts if it's something everybody really wants to fix. Get very specific, clarify what the challenge is, clarify what the desired outcome is, and start small. Where I've seen some of the biggest failures is people define this really, this big opportunity or this big problem, and then they try to put together this really huge initiative with lots of complex interlocking parts, and then the whole thing just falls down on its face and fails, and then a year later someone brings something up and they say, oh yeah, we tried that, it failed. Start with something small and manageable that if you could fix that, it would have a really great impact on your organization. You got staffing issues, you rely too much on registry, figure out how to solve for that.
Right.
You've got an attrition problem, and there are some very specific reasons for your attrition problem. Solve for that, and encourage people to think more creatively. This should be fun. This is not something, yes, it's usually a problem that creates a lot of anxiety and stress for people, but coming up with potential solutions should be an enjoyable process. But start small, start with, problems where you could really achieve a good early win, and involve the right people, and, whatever the outcome is, debrief, learn from that. If it was successful, why was it successful? If it wasn't, why wasn't it? What should we do next time? And there's got to be a next time.
Right. That's that training wheels. All right. Make it a priority. Start with training wheels. Jason, you have a piece of advice?
Yeah, I mean, it's really similar to what Dan just said. I think it's just having the conversations and inviting people to talk about where those pain points are. You can do one, like Dan said, of, identify something, work on it as a team, solve for it, and celebrate that success. And I think every department in your organization can do the same thing. Every department has their own pain points. Right. And to really kind of create that culture of innovation, focusing on that with each department. Think through as a team in your departments, where are our pain points? What should we be looking at changing? What can we do different? How can we solve for these? And make it an ongoing, and like John said, make it an ongoing part of what you do. Whether that is part of your all staff meeting you have every month or every week, focus on those things and keep that language going, and really build on it.
Great, thank you.
I don't know, that all
We've
sounds
only got
too
2
hard.
minutes left. Huh?
That all sounds too hard. I think all you have to do is watch the right TED Talks, take the right botanicals, and then make sure your footwear has the right blend and provenance of wool. But aside from that, as someone, I actually have one practical story before we close. As someone who I think is probably fairly on the more innovative end of the spectrum, I consider what I do when I have an operations problem, which is not kind of my knitting. And I'll give an example. We've been fortunate to have some good growth lately. We've doubled our client base in the last 9 months, but in doing so, I started to see all sorts of little operational risks accumulating across finance, across sales, across client success. And I could imagine, dozens of different remedies. Do we buy a software package? Do we hire someone more junior? Do we go bigger and hire a revenue officer? But I wasn't sure, so I did what I usually do, which is Google a bit, but most importantly, I talked to 5 or 6 people in my network to get their input. And they helped me land on a few different playbooks for revenue operations, stuff we could do internally easily, with a roadmap for what signals to look for when it's time to put bigger structural improvements in place. And this is exactly what I'd recommend for people on the operational side of the spectrum who aren't sure about innovation. I guarantee that if you're in this boat, you can imagine multiple great solutions. Don't let anyone say that you're not an innovative thinker, but you likely, like me, have a little decision paralysis. And you can waste a lot of money chasing new ideas. You're probably not someone who's built their career on wasting money and time. So talk to your network or your network's network and get good advice. I would be 100% honored to have a call with anyone listening today. And I'd be very surprised if any of our other panelists or Shelley or Steve or Lola didn't feel the same way. We love being sounding boards for people who are trying to solve tough problems, and not to raise everybody's hand for them, but I'm pretty sure you'll get good responses if you reach out to this group and ask for some advice.
Nate, thank you so much for saying that, because we are a very close-knit industry, and everybody that I've ever reached out to has always been willing, and they embrace the questions that I have, and they provide me with great feedback, resources. So yes, do tap into your peer network, and LinkedIn is a great place to do that. Shelley, you did a fantastic job keeping the webinar going today. Thank you so much to everybody, all of our panelists, Jason, John, Nate, Dan, thank you. And I want to give a big thank you from Steve Moran, who's in Vegas right now at a conference. And so let's just say, have a great day, everyone.
Thanks everyone for your time.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye.